Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Community Development Committee meeting for Thursday, February the 13th, 2020. And I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are within the territory of the Sechelt First Nation. Do we have any additions to our agenda? Seeing none, motion to adopt the agenda. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you very much. Just before we move on to our presentations and delegations, can I have a motion to receive all reports, correspondence, and minutes, including the handout that was given to us this morning? Moved, seconded, all those in favor? Great, thank you very much. So we'll move on to our delegation. Thank you very much. Make sure your microphone is on and just introduce yourselves.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your time. My name is Andrea Watson, and I've been on the Sunshine Coast Skating Club board for 5 years, third year as president. I appeared as a delegate in November 2018, where the Sunshine Coast Skating Club made the request for ICE to remain in one arena for 10 months. On February 21st, 2019, a board directive was made stating that ICE would remain in Sechelt until the end of May and be reinstalled in Gibsons at the beginning of August if users could meet the variable costs. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the board for listening to the needs of the ICE users and supporting the athletes' necessary training. Having that training ground in August allowed our competitive skaters to compete in one of the most important competitions of the season, which is always held at the end of August. Due to the high scores that two of our skaters achieved, they received an invitation to compete at the BC Winter Games happening next week in Fort St. John. Without your support, they would not have been given this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Since February 2019, our board have been busy planning spring programming and fundraising events. Our membership has increased and our weekly ICE needs also continue to increase. This is an exciting time for ICE sports on the Sunshine Coast. Our organizations continue to grow. We have high-level coaches, a strong board of directors, and the opportunity to retain ICE 10 months of the year. However, the variable cost of $9,000 a week is crippling youth nonprofit organizations, and pricing is out of the arena. We are here today to share information with you about our organizations and the barriers we currently face.
Hi, my name's Stuart Frizzell. I'm coming up on, this will be my 50th year as a resident on the Sunshine Coast this year, so not a newcomer. I am the president of the Sunshine Coast Minor Hockey Association, and the presentation you're going to see sort of showcases some of the stuff that we've been up to. I had the honor last June, after our last meeting here, of traveling up to Kamloops and getting awarded the association, BC Hockey Association of the Year. So I got to stand up in front of all of the other hockey associations throughout the province, and I got to tell them that a big part of our success is our relationship with our regional district, and I got to I sent them that message, and I hope that this will help you to get a better understanding of what we're up to. We've had a super successful year, and we are poised to really to do a lot of great things here in this community. So I'm looking forward to taking what's working and building on it.
ICE sports come particularly close to the ideal of sports for all, a concept envisioning the promotion of health, communication, and quality of life through sports. These sports stand for health and enjoyment while being socially and recreationally relevant to both sexes within a wide age bracket. Between both organizations, we have a combined 450 youth registered between the ages of 2 and 18 and over 100 volunteers. An ice rink always attracts crowds, whether individuals, schools, or clubs. As long as it's supported by diverse, well-organized, utilized programs and opening hours, an ice rink encourages many people to identify with skating. Schools and clubs are the entry-level motivators. From here, one development will lead to recreational sports as a lifelong athletic pastime, while another may take the enthusiast to competitive sports in hockey or figure skating. As we all know, the benefits of ice skating extend beyond physical fitness. Teaches our children goal setting, the pursuit of excellence, gives children a higher level of self-esteem and a more positive outlook on life. They learn to manage stress and perform under pressure, and they learn how to manage failure and how it feels to be successful. They learn good sportsmanship while developing social skills and make bonding friendships. All of these things help them perform better in school and beyond. About our youth organizations. Blues
Okay.
Sunshine Coast Hockey.
Yeah, so we've been around since 1979. In the last couple of years, as you can see, our registration is growing 4 years, straight years in a row. 16 teams of kids, over 75 volunteers in an official capacity. We have 5 tournaments every year, hosting 650 players, play over 250 games of hockey, about 28 hours of weekly ice during the season. We've fundraised over $35,000 to make sure that everyone has access to the sport. And we were proud to have athletes from the Sunshine Coast travel to compete in the Indigenous Championships up in Whitehorse, Yukon. And of course, we also received the Association of the Year. Now, we play underneath the International Ice Hockey Federation. Within Hockey Canada, our branch is BC Hockey, and our district is Pacific Coast Amateur, which covers the Lower Mainland. And we are Sunshine Coast Minor Hockey Association. So we have to comply with all the rules of our governing bodies.
Sunshine Coast Skating Club. The year of 2019 to 2020, we saw over 175 registered skaters, a continued increase of membership. We have over 30 dedicated volunteers. We employ 2 national-level Skate Canada professional coaches. The club is represented by skaters at the provincial, national, and international level, and we have skaters on the provincial and the national team. 2 skaters received the prestigious invite to the BC Winter Games. Last year, we fundraised over $18,000 to ensure registration fees remain as attainable as possible for all families. We provide quality programming for our youth. We have a consistent gold platinum club ranking, and we're partners in Safe Sport and Sport for Life. Our governing body is Skate Canada, so the Sunshine Coast Skating Club runs all programming in accordance with Skate Canada, and all of our coaches are certified professional Skate Canada coaches. Over the past 40 years, the Sunshine Coast Arenas have been venues to multiple events, to name but a few. 2016 Midget Tier 3 Provincials, 2017 Elvis Rocks the Coast, featuring Elvis Stojko, Gladys and Larkin Osman. 2017 Tier 3 Atom Final, 4 hosts. 2018 Canada-China Youth Invitational Hockey Tournament. 2019 the Canucks Alumni Game. 2019 an enchanted evening at the Movies Ice Show with Patrick Chan and Larkin Osman. And in 2020 the PCAHA Tier 3 Midget Final. With so much success, why are we still coming up short? Community is best defined as a group of people who, regardless of the diversity of their backgrounds, have been able to accept and transcend their differences, enabling them to communicate effectively and openly and to work together towards goals identified as being for their common good. Continued success for both youth organizations is reliant on players and skaters, volunteers, competent board of directors, hockey knowledge, figure skating knowledge, professional figure skating and hockey coaches, equipment, community support, fundraising, sponsorship, and ice. A swimmer's pool, a skier's mountain, a soccer's player field, a tennis player's court, an artist's canvas. Without ice, skaters are without a training ground. The 3 barriers that we're currently facing are our allocation process, inconsistent schedule, and variable rates. Successful programming relies on appropriate lead time to plan, information share, and confirm registrations. Confirmed allocation 10 to 12 months in advance would be a huge asset to our programs. Inconsistent scheduling from year to year makes it difficult to build new programming and extend existing programming. We need consistency. Our variable rates are considered high for youth nonprofit organizations. Depending on youth organizations to cover the variable arena expenses during spring allocation is putting a huge burden on our clubs and removing the feasibility of spring ice. When we've rented ice from other arenas in the past for spring and summer, the Squamish Arena charges $44 an hour, Sunset Arena in Vancouver $48.71 an hour, and Powell River $55 an hour, compared to our non-prime $70 an hour. So this slide references 3 different emails illustrating the increase of variable costs. So the top left, April 18, 2016, the variable costs are outlined as $5,536 a week. The bottom left is April 15, 2019, where it shows variable costs at $7,435 a week. And the bottom right, January 30th, 2020, variable costs are $9,028 a week. So in a two-year period between 2014 and 2016, our variable costs increased $441 weekly. The 3-year period, 2016 to 2019, there was a further increase of $1,899 a week. And then from 2019 to today, a further increase of $1,593 a week. The costs continue to increase drastically, having a detrimental effect on youth nonprofit organizations, and placing sole responsibilities of these costs on our clubs that already fundraise collectively $50,000 a year is a huge burden. Not meeting the variable costs gives the illusion of failure. In actual fact, youth nonprofit ICE groups provide a great source of revenue for the community, and it benefits us all if we succeed. If ICE costs were similar to our neighborhood ICE arenas and the threshold was similar to those of clubs around the Lower Mainland, we would be able to meet the threshold successfully. Which brings us to the next slide, where we are requesting an administrative review of the variable costs and the usage threshold that be conducted. Over the years, our organizations have requested a breakdown. SCRD staff have informed us that the costs are solely related to ICE, but it would be very helpful to have the costs listed and an independent review take place. As mentioned earlier, this is an exciting time for ICE sports. We have all the ingredients for success. The board executive and professional coaches that put in countless hours taking away from family time and work commitments because of their dedication and determination to have these organizations succeed. The Sunshine Coast is a tourist destination. Everyone wants to explore the playground we have to offer, and we have the chance to capitalize on this and host tournaments and hockey and figure skating camps all the way through the spring and summer. However, to expand and grow, we need to remove the barriers we spoke about earlier, and we are requesting your support in 2 areas. Firstly, a predictable, consistent schedule that will allow us to plan ahead and build programming. Events and tournaments take a lot of planning and lead time. Deposits have to be paid that are often non-refundable. And secondly, removing the sole responsibility of covering variable costs from the youth nonprofit organizations and holding an administrative review of these costs.
Thanks, Andrea. So when I took a look at this slideshow, I was very impressed, even though I've lived through all this stuff, at how much we've been up to the last few years and the growth. And I go and, as part of my job, go and sit in meetings in Vancouver and talk to the other associations and see what they're going through. And there's membership reports that come out. So I think the fact that our membership, like we're having more and more kids every year, and we're sitting at about 30% volunteer rate. I mean, those 2 things combine. I don't know if that happens everywhere, and I don't know if it happens all the time, but right now we got a real good thing going here. So we really want to capitalize on it. As I was saying about growing up on the coast here, you learn pretty early as a kid that you have to work a little harder. You got to get up a little earlier and travel a little further than the guys over in the city do to get into what you want to do. Raising a family, when you raise a family on the coast here, of course you support your children in what they want to do. And if that happens to be a sport, there comes a time when it involves ferry travel, and that as a young adult raising a family, that's when you really start to understand what the word commitment means. When you think about all the families, what they do to get their kids, that they're signing their kids up for these sports and what they go through, I mean, it is a real testament to the dedication that the young families have for their kids here. And so that's what drives us to keep providing them programs. What we want to do, seeing that we're, being on a team platform, in hockey, we often use that to tell the kids about what you can achieve as a team. And the team, that we're in right now is ICE Sports and the regional district. And as I said, we've had successes with that team, and we've had challenges. What we need to do is what we're communicating to you, that we're in a real good time right now, and we want to be clear about what we need to have to take our game to the next level. And our game, I mean, as our team between ICE Sports and the regional district, our game is providing recreational sports for the children of our community. So that's what we're here to do. We need, we're asking for to take a look at those numbers so that we can find success with the numbers. We need to have a longer term commitment to the duration of ICE, and we need to have it earlier in the year. So we need to know at the beginning of the year that we can start selling programs in the spring. So those are the three key things that we need to have success.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I already saw one hand go up over here, so Director Pratt.
Thank you. It's really impressive from a small community to be able to send athletes to the Winter Games. That's fantastic. I've also been really impressed to see the success of the girls hockey team. That was like really incredible because getting women into sports starts at a very young age and breaking down those barriers. In regards to supporting programs, we have a joint use agreement with the school district. So I do know that the schools do use a fair amount of time within not just the ice arenas, but also the water, the pools and stuff. So we do definitely have that community outlook in getting more students at least exposed to ice sport, whether it just be for recreation or with their school groups. I think my question, now we heard from your presentation, 10 to 12 months ahead of time for scheduling would be most beneficial to you. So I think that would probably be a question over to staff of what's current, where are we at currently with the lead time for schedule, and how workable is a 10 to 12 month ask?
Thank you, Chair. So the current process does not provide the notice that many user groups, ICE and other, require, and we've heard that from groups through dialogue with them. So staff have been working with all user groups on improvements to facility scheduling processes that would enable that longer range planning. And a questionnaire with options was recently circulated to all groups, and staff are now analyzing results with an eye to implementing improvements and achieving that longer planning horizon starting this spring.
Follow-up?
As a follow-up to that is, because scheduling and costs are related to budget and everything, is there any challenges that way with our budget process that staff are cognizant of with the scheduling, just wanting to know on board priorities going forward year to year, or is it that isn't a factor so much? Or that's a loaded question, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair. So in putting options to improve process forward to user group, staff did consider how the timing for an annual planning process would synchronize with the budget process, such that decisions would be made in advance of the budget process, and any changes that were needed could be brought into the following year's budget or brought forward for budget consideration. Under the current allocation policy, the decision about whether ICE is provided or not is effectively cost neutral because incremental costs are recovered. So from that point of view, it's more of an operational decision about scheduling of staff and timing of projects to work around the schedule that's created, and it has less of a budget impact. Thank you.
All right. Director Seegers?
Sorry, I was following what GM Hall was saying. So you're saying if we were to change the process and schedule earlier and it had financial implications, then it would also be able to be addressed in the budget?
Thank you for the question. Most of the options that were put out to user groups for consideration had the majority of planning done late spring for at least the following year. And so that would cross into the next fiscal year, and that would be a June planning time of focus. And so if changes for the following fiscal year were required in order to achieve the desired schedule, those could be brought forward early in the budget process, i.e. Late third quarter, early fourth quarter, for consideration by the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Director McMahon?
I'm a big fan of transparency, so I'm happy to take a look at how recreation decisions are made and how costs are allocated. I've been wanting to do that anyway, but the fact that we have had the ice users here and the dry floor users and the swimmers, and I've had my ear chewed off by a bunch of playing field users, suggests to me that we can, there's room for some examination of how these things are done. So I would support that. I'm not going to make a motion at this point because I think there will be a staff report coming to us at a future meeting. I will just, however, cautiously point out that we are a small community. I ran the stats on Vancouver. They have one public ice rink per 90,000 people, and we have two for 30,000 people. And so it's expensive. There's just no way to get around it. It's a difficult thing to manage.
Director Hiltz?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, when you say an administrative review, what do you mean by an administrative review?
We would like for the regional district to take a look at the costs that are identified for running the facility, if there was ice in versus if there wasn't ice in. Take a close look at that and then consider how much of that you want to ask of the program providers. So first of all, we're curious as to, it looks like it's gone up a whole ton, so we would like that to take a look at just to make sure there wasn't, just take another look at those numbers. If we were to double our registration in the course of a couple of years, you can see what that would do to us. So we'd just like to take a look at those, have those numbers reviewed, and also at the same time, you can make a decision as to how much of that you need to have from us, and ideally, what we need on the scheduling front is, in order to recoup that money, we need the time to be able to book it. So that's critical. So right now, we're currently sitting with a bunch of programs we want to run in May, and we haven't been told if there's ice in May, and that is like right around the corner. So we need to release our registration information. We got programs ready to run, and we can't send that out. We can't fill those slots. So that needs to be changed for it to work for us.
So when you say an administrative review, you're looking for answers to specific questions. Like you're looking about why have the variable costs gone up at a certain rate? You're trying to see some justification behind those figures? Is that?
Yeah, when we talk to other organizations and we say to them, what kind of a financial threshold do you need to meet to have your ice stay in your rink? They say, what are you talking about? So we understand that there has been, in the past, there has been this financial threshold that is a requirement to keep the ice in. And we've seen that number grow, and we would like the board to take a look at what those numbers actually are, down to the detail of the numbers, and then to decide where you want that threshold to be. Because if it keeps growing, when it gets north of $10,000 a week, I mean, it's, for, you know, it's, you can imagine it's going to make it almost impossible for us to carry on if it goes to 15,000. I mean, I don't know what the number is, so please look at the numbers, decide how much of it you want us to carry, and then give us the opportunity to book that ice by telling us it's in times that we can book it. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other questions before we let them? Oh, Director Seegers?
We have a question for staff. By when do we know whether or not there'll be ice in May?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So staff have been working to schedule spring ice since late November, and have gone through 3 rounds of soliciting requests for ice bookings from user groups, the last one being just a couple of weeks ago, and including a message from youth groups, letting all groups know that by renting more ice and working together, there's an opportunity to have ice in longer. And I guess coming away from the board direction about this time last year, staff have been keen to work as closely as possible with youth ice groups to give every opportunity to try to meet incremental costs. And so I suppose if all groups were thinking on the same planning horizon, and as I noted a moment ago, we see that there's an opportunity with a benefit to everybody to improve planning processes so that everybody's thinking about the same planning horizon. But if everybody had been thinking longer term and into spring, we might have had confirmation under our current process for spring ice as early as late November. But as it stands right now, that decision hasn't been finalized because we have been working with all groups to try to gather as many bookings as possible. And where we're at right now, based on current bookings received to date, we are at about 63% recovery of the incremental cost from May. So there remains about a $14,000 deficit. And we've given user groups, I think, until about now to respond to that last call for bookings to see if others want to add a few more slots and close that gap. But failing that, ice would be planned for removal on April 27th. And that's following our current allocation policy as affirmed by the board in February 2019. Thanks.
Just a quick follow-up on that, actually. Is the ice allocated and booked a month block at a time? Like you mentioned, there's about a $14,000 deficit to carry it through. Is that through to the end of May, or is that partway through May?
Thank you for the question, Chair. The allocation is done according to the allocation policy by seasons, and those are roughly defined. Staff have tried to be flexible in terms of looking at where the end of which week makes the best case for keeping ice in. And so April 27th gets very close to full incremental cost recovery right now. I think we're over 80% recovery, and there are still a few things coming in. So staff are confident that for that window things can be closed. And then the following about 4 weeks, it falls to 63%. So we could average that over the entire period if desired, or look to push ice out another week or back a week. Input from user groups about what is helpful to them, knowing that programming and event cycles are blocked out, is taken into consideration when we're building schedules. Thanks.
Director Ties?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I guess my thoughts on this are, speaking from personal experience, I used to play hockey in the Lower Mainland, and it was considerably more expensive than doing it here. The ice time here is quite a bit cheaper, and so. But I see the escalation of variable costs, and I would like to eventually see a report on that. And I think there's a future report coming as to why that's gone up, whether it's through asset management or what costs are there that weren't there before. But overall, I think Director McMahon kind of nails it, that we have a very low population to pay for a lot of ice. And so I think there needs to be a compromise that needs to be found. But I am looking forward to that report. And, I do, I'll bug Dave and see if he wants to book us to the end of May. See if we can keep playing.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. So last year we worked with staff, worked with the user groups, and kind of waived the requirement, I think, for some of it to allow ice time to be there. So this is, staff are following our direction around recovering the variable costs. So I think we're assuming here, and I don't want to just assume that staff are going to come back to us with a report on this. Would you like a recommendation on the books indicating that we'd like you to investigate this and also come back to us with the variable costs and how we can look at addressing the issues that they brought forward?
Thank you. Yes, a motion would be appreciated. Thank you.
So
Director Seegers, you moved. Seconded? Seconded. Any questions, comments? Director McMahon.
Just a brief comment. I would look forward to a broader look at recreation services, but not until we have new staff in place, because there's been some changes and there's going to be some reorganization. So it would make better sense to look at this again in maybe 6 months or when appropriate.
Director Seegers.
I think there's an immediate need with the user groups to deal with this piece. I know we're looking at fields, we're looking at all those kinds of things, and I agree. It's a bigger picture. Costs, as you indicated, we are a small population. We've got 4 facilities. We need to look at how we support all of those facilities and to what level a community is willing to. 5 facilities, sorry, yep, with Pender. We're, 4 down here, yep. Yeah. We need to find out to what level the community is willing to support these, because we are subsidizing these a lot. We know that. Is that what the community wants? We don't know. So there's some work to be done on the bigger picture. Thanks.
Director Pratt.
Just to the level of the community needs. I grew up in a small town in rural Alberta, and my best friend still lives there with her 5 kids. She's a hockey mom. I grew up 20 minutes from where Kurt Browning lived and grew up. Brad Stewart also trained from the NHL, trained and grew up in Rocky. So I understand the need. I think, and not only that, my best friend's a curler too. So the ice need, I understand, I understand ice, hockey, skating. I grew up in it. It's everybody I know had a backyard rink. Much colder climate, so you're able to do that. There's the spring ice, though, but there's definitely even though it's a small community, it's probably 10,000 altogether. But there are more kids that are involved in it because they have those ice surfaces, and it's such a, when the backyard's frozen 6 months out of the year, everybody, has to enjoy ice sports because there's no other choice. So I have a concern about putting too many resources into spring ice if we don't have the user need for it. And I understand, like, it's incredible to be able to send athletes, young athletes, to provincial events. But I'm really interested to see what the reporting comes back with, because it is a level of investment in our youth, which I truly believe in. But the cost, so I'm quite happy to look at this and get more information from it. But even in Rocky, I mean, ice is going to be out at the end of March. So, and they're still going to have like -10, I think. But they don't do spring ice. Spring ice for them there ends the end of March. So it's an interesting juxtaposition for me to see this.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Director Pratt. I would, paying a little homage to the Academy Awards that just came up, there was 2 movies in the recent past, and this has been coming up in my head thinking about the quandary that we're in here. 2 great quotes from movies. One of them was "Build it and they will come," and the other one is "Show me the money." So I think we need a little bit of "build it and they will come." I'm confident if we knew that we had ice, we can sell that ice. Director Tease's comments about the cost of ice in the city. One thing we really have going for us here is that we have community-run facilities here. We don't have all the private ice they have in the city. And those other associations, they're in a real pickle for ice in the city. And there's a lot of privatized situations in there, and that drives the cost up. So, I mean, I really want to acknowledge that we're in a good situation that way here. But really what we need is we need to have something to schedule programming on. We need to know about that surface.
Furthermore, as well, what happened last spring was that bookings continued to come in right up to that very month. So we feel really confident that there will be continued bookings that will continue to come in for May, and that gap of 63% would actually close quite a bit more. I mean, obviously, like the financial obligation of the $16,000 goes hand in hand with the report, and our variable costs is the threshold where it should be. In terms of just responding really quickly to Director Pratt's comment about the ice coming out at the end of March, I mean, I think we touched on that a little bit last year in terms of we're in a bit of a unique situation in that we can't drive 20 minutes down the road as you can in the mainland. We've got the 10-hour travel days, we've got the ferry costs and everything else, and it is a huge impact on training. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a motion on the floor. I did have one question for staff regarding the motion, though. We don't have a date or timeline attached to that. Would staff like that incorporated into the motion, or just...
Thank you. I'm looking at my colleagues sitting in the gallery. Staff have a substantial amount of information together, and so can provide a report in fairly short order. Certainly no later than Q2 of this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Anybody else? Well, we got a motion on the floor. All those in favor? All right.
In one of your slides, you had the 2017 arena allocation, and underneath of it had Freedom of Information Act, August 2018. I'm not sure what that means.
We had requested through the Freedom of Information Privacy Act just what the revenue was for a 3-year period. And that Yeah, so the report, I'm trying to think of the years. It covered 2016, 2017, and 2018. So that's why we don't have anything past that. But those were the 2018 numbers of the revenue from the ice users and the dry floor users. We're just interested just to see the different amounts of revenue that we bring in compared to the dry floor users. Those costs have continued to increase. Like, we have a lot more daytime ice bookings now and have done for the past 2 years than we did in 2018. So that revenue would be a lot higher today, I feel. But that's just the most recent information that we had.
So the intent of the FOI request was to understand the revenue generated from the facilities and which groups are generating that revenue. Is that what the question you were trying to ask through that request?
Yeah, through the different organizations over the years, we've just tried to have information that shows the revenue versus the incremental costs, just to try and get a picture. And we've asked over the years and not really felt as though we've been successful in terms of having a true transparent picture in terms of what those actual costs are. And just knowing, so, like more information would be really helpful, and thank you very much for allowing that process to happen. But just a really detailed, itemized list of what all of these expenses are that fall into incremental costs versus revenue, I think is really the true picture of what we're trying to get to.
If I can add to that, I have a report in front of me that it reaches back to 2015, and it really details out the economic impact of this. It's around minor hockey, but the community impact beyond the hiring of ice, but the restaurant impact, all the tourism. I mean, the large part of it is under the tourism category, so that's certainly worth considering. The springtime can be a very busy time, and we can certainly bring a lot of families up to the coast, and I would like to have that recognized as well.
Great. Director Seegers, did you want to?
Okay, I want to float something. We'll see where this goes. I have to say that I'm really impressed with the commitment and the work your groups have put in over the last year. And yes, we did partner with you last year to, put the ice in, give you some time to develop your programs. I don't know if 1 year is sufficient to do that. So I'd like to see if there's an appetite at the board to cover off the variable costs that they may not cover this year, to give them one more year to build the capacity and build the program. So we'll see what you all say.
Director Kroll.
Sort of in conjunction with what Director Seegers was saying, and to the delegation, I sense there's a bit of chicken and egg situation here. You can't get the programs to book because they don't know there's going to be ice, and they're not booking because they don't want to commit themselves if there isn't going to be ice. So I think it sort of ties in with where Director Seegers is going is, if you know definitely there's going to be ice, are these people who are dragging their feet going to commit? Which is sort of a bit of a sticky wicket.
Anybody want to weigh in from that side of the table? Go ahead, Director Hills.
My weighing in is I haven't got enough information. I don't understand, and to make a commitment, I'm sure there's other groups who are looking for an increased subsidization as well. I don't have the information, so to do it here today, I'd be reluctant to go down there.
Director McMahon, then we'll come back to Director Kroll.
Yeah, what he said. I don't like making on-the-fly decisions here because it's not a completely fair and transparent process. That said, I'm not very happy that a group feels that you have to go to an FOI to get the information you need. So obviously our reporting needs to be better. That shouldn't be happening. So yeah, again, we need to review this.
Director Kroll.
And this is perhaps to staff. And it's the chicken and egg thing again. We have a situation where the people who want ice can't commit to programs because they don't know if they're going to have ice. And conversely, do we have people hovering in the wings wanting floor time without ice? And they're sort of in the same position of, can we go? Is it going to be ice? Are we going to have a floor to play on? So I think what there needs to be is a definite commitment that groups on both sides can schedule. And sort of back to Mayor Seeger's suggestion, is a year enough for these groups to get in line?
GM Hall, did you want to comment, or?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly to reiterate that staff took from the conversations, or take from the conversations over the last 18 months with all of our valued arena user groups that scheduling improvements would benefit everybody, and that includes SCRD. And that process is underway. And yeah, and staff see the opportunity there. Thank you.
Director McMahon.
Yes, with respect to the chicken and egg dilemma and the carts before the horses, that's an operational decision, and I am not comfortable at the board making operational decisions. That's really not our role. That's like micromanaging staff. So I see that staff are aware of the problem, and we know scheduling has got to improve, because you need to be able to plan what you're doing. That's what we try to do here all the time, is to have some sort of sane planning process. So I feel your pain very much, and I hope we can get this fixed for the next season so that we don't have to be back there this time next year.
Trying to find our moving target on when ice will come out or not. Director Seegers.
Thank you. I agree. It is an operational issue. And we actually put ourselves in that situation last year when we advised staff that our line was going to be having the user groups cover the variable costs. So we've already stuck our toe in there, and now we're here this year looking at, how do we deal with it? Do we give them another year to sort out all of the pieces so that everybody has, staff, the user groups, etc., have the foundation upon which to move this forward? I'd be willing to do that, but I don't know if, we just finished budget, so it has a budget implication as well, right? So.
Director Pratt.
So what I'm hearing is you'd like potentially subsidize the variable costs. And I guess the question would be to staff is, when would the board need to make a decision on that in order to give staff time to potentially put it in the budget?
Yesterday would be my guess.
No, yesterday was Wednesday. It would have been like Monday or
Tuesday. Tuesday would have been my guess, yes.
Yeah, because, there's a potential significant budget implication. And if this is a direction the board chooses to go, and but also at the same time, I would like a little more information. I don't like doing this on the fly. We had a very, I'm going to use the word fulsome discussion last year about it, and it's an issue. It's about investing in the community, but also at the same time being cognizant of the service level, and it's a wants and needs. What do we need to put in versus what do we want? What does the community want? So, poor GM Hall.
In terms of process, last year, I'm not sure this is a full answer, but I'll do my best in the absence of our Chief Financial Officer at the moment. Last year, and as the delegation noted, bookings came in until right before the period being planned. And so last year, the board directive, which was almost exactly a year ago, was to proceed with, at that time it was April ice that was being discussed, and that staff report back through the third quarter variance on any financial implications. And last year, because bookings came in and there weren't material implications, there was no detailed report back within the recreation third quarter variance report. So that would be one approach that could be applied here, and staff could work to bring a report to the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting before budget adoption and seek advice from our Chief Financial Officer on opportunities to address it in 2020, be it through the budget or through a future variance report. That's staff's attempt to think constructively, although it just pushes the decision or pushes the advice maybe off a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Did you have a follow-up?
Well, there was one question put forward by the director on my right about the potential of using the grant and aid process for some of the shortfall. I don't know if that's an appropriate or to assist the organizations as they try to scaffold, at least for maybe 1 year. There's a potential of that. There could be a grant and aid application made to the board to help with the funding, which would be the one-time year. Like if that would certainly help with the costs if you're approved through that process. Other than that, I mean, GM Hall has given us a couple of options.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, with regard to last year's variable cost of about $7,400, if we took the numbers for this year, for April and May, and used that variable rate, how close we would be to meeting that threshold?
Do you have an answer to that, or no? No.
Staff could include that in our report back. The report in February 2019 that led to that directive and regarding April ice and next steps, and confirmed that May ice would be offered in 2020. So that's sort of the planning horizon that was established at that time. Included a full breakdown of incremental costs. And at that time, the changes included some of the regulatory changes around arena staffing that came out of the Fernie incident and were imposed on operators of ice facilities. And staff can confirm this in our report back, but I believe that the 2019 variable costs were updated to include those and have not changed for 2020. Thank you.
Sorry, may I just add, I just did some very quick math, and so there was an increase from 2019 to 2020 of $1,593 a week for the variable costs, which would, if we were going off Kate's idea, $6,372 off the current $14,000 shortfall.
Okay. CAO, do you have your hand up? Or no? Okay. Falling asleep back there? Unless somebody has a very specific motion to put forward at this time, I would like us to move on. Does anybody have anything they want to put forward?
I'll float this, that we commit to keeping ice in until the end of May in one of the arenas.
And that staff come back with budget implications?
Nope. That's already in the other motion previous to this, that we just commit to having ice in to the end of May.
Is there a seconder? Go ahead.
I'm assuming it would help everyone, if the people who are currently dragging their feet in committing to May Ice, if they would commit as quickly as possible, because it's obviously the more people who commit, it's going to reduce the financial implication on the board, who, have been wrestling with a lot of money these days.
Somebody want to second that motion? If not, it'll die on the floor. You'll second it? All right. Any other comments, questions? Director Pratt?
It's to staff what the implications are for this, or this would be a report back, I would imagine, or we haven't asked for that. This is a clear directive to ask staff, or to direct staff to put in. So I guess my question is going to be on the fly to the GM, like, we're looking potentially because we have a certain amount of guaranteed bookings now, but there's not enough to cover a lot of the incremental costs that we have. So this has budget implications for this year. Significant. It's not so much a question, I guess, as a wondering, is just, I'm not sure I support this.
So follow up. What I heard the GM say was that when we committed last year to April, we didn't know at that point whether or not there would be a shortfall. And the third quarter report indicated there wasn't in the end. Is that correct? So it was minimal, very minimal. So what I'm hearing is, if we were to commit now, that there may not be much of an impact on our budget. And we're giving them the opportunity ahead of time, before we would get the other report, to actually push that forward. I mean, I've seen what these people do. They're out there working the community to pull every dollar they can to cover off what needs to be covered off. I'd like to give them the opportunity to do that. And I mean, that this would be like the last year. But we've given you 2 years then to pull this together, to show us what you can do. I'm impressed by what you did last year. I'd like to give you the opportunity to do it again.
Director Pratt?
So last year, we guaranteed till the end of April. This is pushing it forward by 1 more month and guaranteeing till the end of May. Because are there dry ice bookings already, or dry bookings already for May? So that this would interfere with them, because it's changing the game, not just for our ice users, but for our dry arena users as well. And then after the ice is removed, there's a certain amount of time that's needed for getting the surface ready for those dry users. So we have to be cognizant of that as well. We do already have bookings for the dry arena on that plan. No? Okay, so I'm seeing staff say one thing and users another, so I'm going to go,
GM Hall?
Hopefully this helps with clarity. Staff have solicited requests from users for May. There are currently no confirmed plans or bookings. And yes, there are requests for dry floor rentals in May, but no, they have not been confirmed. Nor have ICE requests at this stage. Thank you.
Director Seegers.
So I think I heard you say that when we made the commitment last year, we said that for 2020 we would keep ICE in till the end of May. When we did that, again, based on covering the variable costs, to clarify.
Thank you, Chair. So the directive from February 2018, or February 28th, 2019, was affirming the procedure that ICE be provided when variable costs are equal to or less than revenue generated from user group bookings, and that for May 2020 and beyond, ICE be offered at Sunshine Coast Arena.
Offered but not guaranteed. Anybody else want to speak to the motion on the floor? No? No, sorry, we got a motion on the floor. All those in favor? Opposed? Let's try that. Director Ties, you were in favor?
Yeah, I was in favor.
I was in favor. You were in favor. And you were in favor as well. Director Kroll? Okay, so that passes. Yeah, that passes. Okay. Anything else on this? Short? Real short? Go ahead, Director Kroll.
It just proves something that was offered up by the delegation that build it, and they will come.
So now prove it to us.
We will. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your
Thank you for
time.
coming.
And yeah, thank you.
All right. Moving on to Annex A. Oh, Director Hiltz.
Who was the voting, what was the voting on that particular motion, just as a point of order?
It would have been everybody but A. Yeah. Okay, directors, let's move on. Annex A, Community Development Department 2019 Q4 and year-end report. This is received for information already, so I guess the question is, are there any questions on it? Director McMahon.
I was happy to see on page 11 that Soames Hill is still in Elphinstone, but I noted that the sports field bookings look like they were substantially down, and the community hall bookings were considerably up, and I just wondered if staff had any observations about that.
No particular observations, Chair. Weather is a big driver for field bookings. Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Director Hiltz.
Sure. On page 12, just in general, I'm looking at all electoral area, F trails and beach accesses. So I'm just wondering about the challenges of dealing with the islands, Gambier and Keats, and staff's ability to get over that. If you could just explain a little bit, is it easy, or is there a challenge in order to get that maintenance done from a logistical point of view? I'm just wondering about that.
Thank you for the question, Chair. Certainly with islands, there's added complexity, especially for specialized services like bucket truck or the like that might be required for tree work. The use of a contracted on-island caretaker on Gambier ensures more timely response, and staff are always appreciative of feedback from the community pointing out issues when they're first realized and small and can more easily be dealt with. Thank you.
Is that a follow-up? Yeah. Go ahead.
So the follow-up is to keep encouraging the public to send information to info@SCRD about any parks issues and to, okay.
Director Lee.
Again, did you do that? I was looking at key projects in Q4, and it talks about implementation of the foundation agreement and coordination and partnership on housing needs assessment. Did we get a report on those yet, or is that going to be coming along later?
Thank you for the question. On the foundation agreement, I believe there's a report coming to either infrastructure services or planning in March with an update. And on the housing needs assessment, a report is expected to be received no later than June, and so would probably appear on an agenda here within a month of receipt. Thank you.
All right. Director Pratt.
Not a question, just a comment that it always impresses me how diverse the services are within your department, and just thank you to GM Hall, and because this is a lot of very different projects, and and just very impressed, and thank you very much. You have a very, very busy department.
Director Seegers.
Did you see the juggling up here? Just for the board, we had a meeting yesterday with our director of planning. With regard, and yeah, because we're also looking at doing a housing survey, right, in Sechelt with our housing committee, and we were informed that the housing planning or whatever the needs assessment group are going to be coming out with a survey that will help inform as well, which will be part of that, and that's what's going to be happening starting in March, I think they said, right? Yeah.
Director Lee.
I know we did quite a bit of work on Baker Beach, but I don't see a status on this. Is that because we're not done yet?
Thank you for the question, and the director may correct my memory, but that might have been close to the end of the third quarter, and so it might have been in the report that precedes this one. But there was a bunch of debris removal and fire risk mitigation work undertaken there. Thank you.
Might have to go back through your paperwork. Yes. Okay. Anybody else? Director Hiltz?
Yeah, on page 14, community hall bookings. Is there some? It's quite a substantial increase in bookings, just year over year. Is any attribution to that?
No, sorry, I don't have any particular insight. I guess I can say that staff in a variety of areas are constantly marketing our halls as an opportunity for the community to come together, and I find myself mentioning it to people I encounter on the street who are, asking about some place to do whatever thing, and I know that many of my colleagues do. So I hope it's an indication that our marketing, formal or otherwise, is working. Thanks.
I think just to add to that, and then I'll let you go again. There's also been a decline over the last year or two in the private party and event rentals services here on the Sunshine Coast. So a lot of weddings, a lot of even gatherings done with tents and things like that. Those services don't exist up here anymore. So there's probably some of that. Director Hiltz?
So the follow-up, is there still capacity in the community halls for increased bookings, and we're not hitting any thresholds anywhere out there?
I don't have detailed information to offer. The last time we did a deeper dive on hall capacity was probably maybe 2 years ago, and at that time there was utilization rates were high and steady, but there was still opportunity for both ongoing and one-time bookings, and I'm not aware of concerns about an inability to book time. And with Grantham's Hall coming online tomorrow, there's that much more capacity available in our system. Thanks.
Director Lee.
Is it on now? It was flashing for some reason.
That's new.
Yeah, it was flashing green. But building permit reviews completed by planning staff in 2019, it's 117, which is down from the 2018 total of 254. Is this indicative of the building permits that are going to be issued or were issued, or is there some reason that figure is lower? I thought we were going up instead of down. I'm looking at page 4.
Thank you for the question. I think that the number is indicative of the gap that we had in staffing in the planning division later in 2019. And certainly building and construction activity remains strong, and the building permit numbers that follow reflect that. And staff would expect to see that number bounce back up higher so that the average, when we look across a couple of years, is more consistent with prior years. Thank you.
Anybody else? Last chance. I'd like to move on. Okay. Annex B, item 4. Zoning amendment bylaws number 310.184 2018 and 337.118 2018 for short-term rental accommodation regulations, implications of implementing temporary use permit. Needs a longer title. Can I hand it over to staff? Do they have anything they want to speak to on this?
Thanks, Chair. Sure. We have an introduction. So assessment on the implications of implementing temporary use permit for short-term rental accommodation indicates that there are costs and benefits to the SCRD. Although the costs or benefits cannot be quantified at this time, it is expected that the costs can be offset by the potential benefits of implementing TUP and recovered by application fees. So possibly increase in fines for infractions can further enhance bylaw compliance and compensate for enforcement efforts. To cope with uncertainty, the SCRD has the option to manage the scope of implementation through budget for staffing, setting specific terms and conditions, subject to a short-term rental use to rezoning, or repeal the TUP provisions in the future. Staff recommend that the bylaw proceed to third reading. So if the board gives the bylaws third reading, it is recommended that prior to adoption, the TUP implementation plan, along with amendments to other relevant bylaws, be brought forward for consideration. So if the board chooses not to proceed with the recommended TUP provisions, staff recommend consideration of the two alternative options as provided in the report and arranging for a second public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'd just like to start with a general, if you could walk us through how we try to enforce these things. Like I have a party house that I've heard a lot about in my area that has been the subject of repeated complaints by neighbors, visits by the police, visits by the fire department, and so forth. But how do we respond to this? What typically happens?
Staff.
Thank you for the question. So a complaint might come in a number of ways, and if it's not received as a formal or complete complaint, then staff might reach out to whoever contacted us to flag an issue to gather the necessary details to proceed with a bylaw enforcement investigation. And that might involve discussion with planning as to the zoning and a review of files related to the property. And then a bylaw enforcement officer would probably pay a visit to the property, attempt to contact the owner, and proceed towards an enforcement action with a goal of compliance. And a ticket could be issued for a contravention of a zoning bylaw or a noise bylaw, etc. And I believe that past staff reports on this topic have mentioned some of the statistics around the number of complaints received and the number of enforcement actions. There certainly are, and the senior planner notes in this report, there are challenges with enforcement relating to things like noise that are difficult to quantify and point in time. Thank you.
Follow up?
And so, assuming that we issue tickets and they may or may not get paid, is there any way we can shut this down? Or do we just keep issuing tickets? Is that all we can do?
I'll be careful not to speak out of my depth here, but I believe that tickets can be issued for each instance, and so that may mean a daily, as frequently as a daily contravention if something is occurring that's contrary to a bylaw on an ongoing basis. And beyond that, legal proceedings can be initiated if required. One of the challenges with our current bylaw is that the bylaw is fairly silent on short-term rentals. Thank you.
Director Lee, then Director Seegers.
It interested me in that it says a short-term rental accommodation managed by an off-site operator can only be considered through a rezoning application. I don't quite understand what that would mean. Do we have a zone already that does it? Would it be a special exemption or whatever that line means? I was interested in.
Thank you for the question. So actually that falls under the alternative option 1. So currently the short-term rental managed by off-site operator is not permitted in the zoning bylaw. That's why if anyone who would like to operate a short-term rental with an off-site operator, they have to apply to amend the zoning bylaw to allow that particular use.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
So that means there is no zone in any of our OCPs that would allow an off-site operator today. We would have to make one, like residential 142, and you can all have. Do I have that right?
Not necessarily, because you can do site-specific zoning amendments, right? So within a zone, you can say permitted on parcel, whatever, this use. But I'll just look to planning staff to confirm that.
Thank you for the question. That is actually the direction we would likely take. We would rezone on a site-specific basis only.
Go ahead.
Is that an OCP amendment as well, as a bylaw amendment then?
Thank you for that question. I don't believe it would be an amendment to the OCP since bed and breakfast is already a short-term type of accommodation, and this would essentially be consistent with that, with the exception that it would be an off-site operator scenario. I don't think it would be.
I've got a list. Yeah, Director Seegers. Oh. Director Seegers.
So I'm confused now. Currently, we cannot have off-site operators. But if we go forward, if the board goes forward with the third or whatever, adopting what's here, then we would allow them under these new regulations. And they would not need rezoning? Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. So yes, that's correct. So what we're proposing is to create a new definition for short-term rental, but it's only managed by off-site operators. Also has this short-term rental with an off-site operator has to also obtain a temporary use permit in order to operate. That is what's being proposed in the bylaws.
Okay, so now my real question. In the documents here, you indicate that currently the fine is $150. And I think you know and we know and everybody knows that that's not sufficient to deter behavior given the amount of money that they actually make from a short-term rental. So that would be something that would be addressed prior to adoption? Is that what you look? So if the board says, yes, we're going to move forward with third reading on this with the temporary use permit, that those kinds of things would be addressed prior to adoption?
Yes, that's staff recommend that prior to adoption, the staff will bring back a implementation plan along with amendments to other bylaws, which will include the municipal ticketing bylaw and the bylaw enforcement notice bylaw. In those bylaws, the fee increase could be incorporated. Thank you.
Which is recommendation number 3, almost to the word. Go ahead.
Okay, and then final piece is, somebody said, well, what happens if we fine them and whatever? My understanding is if they don't pay the fine, that can actually be added to property taxes. Is that correct?
With apologies to the committee, staff don't have an answer for that here, sorry.
All right. Director McMahon.
Okay, so to be clear about this, we do not allow STRs with off-site operators, but we have hundreds of them.
Yes.
And two questions. Have we ever had a rezoning application for one of these things? And have we ever taken legal action to shut one of them down?
On the director's first question, staff are pretty confident saying no. We've never had an application for rezoning. And on the second, planning staff are not aware of a legal action. Thanks.
Director Ties.
So, as most of you know, I've got some serious issues with the whole TUP thing. Listed on my website, so I'm not going to go through them again. In the meantime, Director Hills has dug up some legal case that also means that short-term rentals with an off-site operator is not really a residential use of a property, which means that there'd be some serious zoning implications if we were to actually heed that legal advice. And the other issue for me is that right now there's, as Director McMahon said, hundreds of off-site operator properties in operation, and there is so they're flaunting our regulations right now. I don't see how asking somebody to pay $1,500, write an application, get all the neighbors that are already complaining to complain even more, would actually change anything about these off-site operations going on right now. So to me, the clear first step would be to ramp up enforcement and to actually incentivize people to follow regulations that are currently being followed right now. So I think we've been talking about a lot of carts being before the horse. I think those are kind of my issues that I've got with this whole thing. I personally think that we shouldn't allow off-site operators, period. And it's a housing issue. It's a clear directive, and it makes things very straightforward. There's no 2-bedroom thing going on, and there's no 2-bedroom limit thing going on, and there's I think overall we should at this point abandon the whole TUP process. It's going to put on a huge burden on staff for each application. And I think on page 21 it says here that other areas that have implemented a TUP have received relatively small numbers of applications. The impact on their administration is not considered substantial, and the effectiveness of TUP in managing vacation rentals is inconclusive. Well, that's what Mayor Osborne said to me for the Port Alberni Clayoquot Regional District. She said, yeah, people aren't applying, they're just keeping going with business as usual. So the TUP process, we're putting all this effort in setting it up, and it doesn't work. So to me, it's a very straightforward thing. Let's move on without TUPs and just not allowed offsite operators, period.
Director Hiltz? I have a speakers list. I am keeping track of everybody.
Thanks. So it's a couple of questions for staff. So the lack of a definition, I'm going to use the new term of art, STIR, STRs, right? That's the new term I picked up there, STIRs. STIRs. So without a definition of a STIR, the bylaw enforcement aspect is much more complicated. Even though it's not allowed as a primary use, having a definition allows more ready access to do bylaw enforcement. So that's the first question, is the lack of a definition of a STIR makes enforcement more difficult. And then the second one is, are TUPs becoming close to a best practice for STIRs?
I think everybody ends up doing it just a little bit differently. Sorry, I'm filling the void here while our planning staff confer and try and figure out an answer for you. But, I think that's what Director Ties was implying there about on the island, right? Like everybody's got a little bit different system that they've. Now I see a hand from the staff table. Staff?
Thank you. Thought-provoking questions. So on the first question of would a definition of short-term rental be helpful to enforcement? If short-term rental is not, or STIRs, are not permitted, then a definition is not required. If they're not expressly permitted, then then they're prohibited. And so anything that doesn't fit the definition of bed and breakfast, which is currently permitted, would not be allowed, and thus enforcement would be equally easy whether there was a definition of short-term rental or not. And I apologize, I've lost the second part of the director's question.
Are TUPs a best practices for STIRs?
Thank you for the good question. The best practice? Certainly they are a practice that's employed elsewhere in BC. As the senior planner's report notes, the result of that is varied and relatively young, so difficult to generate a clear conclusion. They're one of a very few number of tools that are available to address this type of use. Thank you.
Business licensing would be great, but the regional district doesn't have that capability right now. Director Lee, you're next.
I think we do need a definition of an STR, but simply an expansion of the B&B description. And I'm not exactly sure what's missing, but I believe it's something like if you had a suite in the basement of your house and you wanted to just plain rent it out short term, I don't think the B&B would cover it, except in Pender Harbor, because we have 5-bedroom inns under B&B. But I don't even know if in Pender it would cover it. And just to be clear where I'm coming from, I believe that we need an on-site operator. It's too disruptive to a residential neighborhood when you rent out. And I believe we should up the fine enough so it's not profitable, and that we should leave it to complaint process. And I like the fact that we could do a spot rezone, which would allow the neighbors to say this is fine. To me, that makes a nice package. So my question is, would you recommend an additional definition of STR to make it like a B&B, but so that, say you had a second house, coach house, you could rent it out as a STR, which I don't believe falls under a B&B definition right now. And you could rent out the whole, you could live in the basement and rent out the whole upstairs as an STR, providing it was your primary residence and you were on site.
Thank you. Staff believe that what the director is seeking is covered in the amendments that are proposed in bylaw 310-184 and 337-118 as regards changes to the definition of bed and breakfast. And if there's something more that's required, then that would form an amendment to the bylaw. Thank you.
Did you want to follow up, or you good?
I was just curious.
Okay.
Sorry. I was just curious if, in staff's opinion, those changes that were proposed there were sufficient to do it. That's all, or would you need to write a few more? That was my question.
Sounds like that's sufficient, even, yeah. Director Seegers, you're next.
Thank you. I heard what Director Tighe said, and while I agree in some way, what I read from this report is that this issue of short-term rentals has just ballooned in the regional districts. And while there might be complaints, we don't actually have an enforcement process that would address the issues that we're having. So staff have come up with the temporary use permit, as other areas have done, to provide our bylaw officers the process and the method to be able to deal with the complaints. On page 20, it lists a lot of the benefits of putting them in. Yes, there are, it will require additional staff. We don't know how much at this point because we don't know how many people take part in this. But by saying if you have an off-site operator and you need to have a temporary use permit, if they don't, we can enforce because we'll have the mechanism in place. That's not there right now. As they indicated, short-term rentals are not indicated in the BENS program or they don't know what to do with that. So this would also put that mechanism in behind to support the enforcement, be able to deal with it up and down the coast.
Go ahead, Director Tighe.
Yeah, so as staff just pointed out, bylaw 310 is meant to address those definitions, and now I think the TUP is basically just talking about offsite operators, and so ultimately, if we just say, well, let's just abandon the TUP thing, I think bylaw staff still has enough tools to enforce saying, no, we're not allowing offsite operators, and here's your fine, and that's so I think either way we're going to have I think bylaw is going to have the tools to be able to enforce it. I think if we want to give a clear a clear indication to the tourism industry that we would like some investment, by the tourism industry here, then doing something like this will help. Because right now, I think any of the big players are holding off to see whether demand is actually going to be there, and demand gets created by banning offsite operators. So I think to me everything kind of points in the direction of not allowing offsite operators, and it's for the community's sake. It's a logical logical conclusion to me.
Okay. Director Kroll, Director Pratt, Director Hiltz, and then Director Lee. No, McMahon, then Lee.
Just for what it's worth, the current Gibson's process with the short-term rentals is that we're not allowing off-site operators. It ostensibly has to be your principal residence. And, pending the approval of the current bylaw before us, there's 44 business licenses on hold waiting to see if they're going to renew. And the bylaw officer says by no way has she been able to capture all the people that are operating short-term rentals with proper business licenses, because it's tracking them down and finding them. Some people have been very forthcoming, but currently 44 business licenses pending for renewal, waiting to see the outcome of our bylaw. But there won't be any units that aren't owner-occupied.
It's your turn. Director Pratt.
Okay, thank you. So I've been struggling with this quite a bit because I have two minds. There's the community fabric, and then there's the business side. And the business side has multiple implications as well. I have a history in tourism. I'm currently a realtor. I know why people buy here. I know the gap that we have in accommodation. But the short-term rental, Airbnb, VRBO, all of these programs, they don't necessarily invest in the community in the same way that our bed and breakfasts do. We've always had a very robust bed and breakfast community on the coast. And the short-term rental accommodation, with the sudden rise of the Airbnb movement and these other online booking stations that essentially have no bricks and mortar buildings, they don't invest in the community in the same way, which it harms the fabric of the community. It's different than having a bed and breakfast that you have an on-site operator that still is buying their groceries locally, is still encouraging people to use other local businesses. I know as a realtor how many clients I've had come through, how many other realtors have clients that come through that are looking purely to purchase a property that they can use as a short-term rental property. Because in reality, 2 nights of a short-term rental is the same thing that's equal to 1 month's rent from a long-term person. So our fines are going to need to go up. This, it's affecting our housing stock. You go on tour as a realtor and you see a lot of these empty homes that are just waiting for the short-term rental to come through. They're filling a gap within our tourism industry, yet they're not supporting our bricks and mortar hotels that we have on the coast. Those, we have currently some that are prime waterfront locations that are currently sitting empty. It is a big problem in my community. The last time I did a search in the fall, there were 80 plus listings on Airbnb just along Red Roofs Road. And I've heard it a lot from my community members about, look, we have these problem places, or they're sitting here and So our fines need to go higher. So a couple of questions for staff. Is $500 the highest we can go legislatively? Are we bound by that locally, or are we bound by that provincially? And what happens if we bring in if we say no short-term rental accommodation? Is there a loophole of a grandfather clause for anybody that was already running one? Illegally. Well, we didn't, but the thing is we weren't addressing it before. So is that going to be their argument coming back? So, because this is it's an emerging issue that's been happening over the last couple of years. For anybody that's already purchased and said, hey, well, it doesn't address that anywhere. And, part of the reason people move to the rural areas is so they can, do what they want. Because we don't ask for business licenses. And I definitely think it's time that we look at that, at pursuing business licenses, and then maybe, revisit this going forward. After whatever decision we make today, I think this is going to be something that continues, that we'll have to look at. The temporary use permit, I really worry about what it's going to be putting on staff, and we're going to be have to add another level in. And I can expect that we're not going to have a lot of TUP applications and people coming forward, because they're just going to try and fly under the radar, because we're not going to have the resources to put into the enforcement.
So there were two questions in there.
In my ramble.
Did staff catch that?
On the first question about the maximum fine, apologies to the committee, staff don't have that information. I do recollect $500 being an upper limit for at least one type of bylaw infraction, but staff can report back if further information is needed. And on the second, about loopholes or some sort of non-conforming status, because short-term rentals with off-site operators are not a permitted use currently, they are prohibited. And so there's no loophole there that staff can see. Thank you.
Okay. Director Hiltz, then Director McMahon, then Director Lee, then hopefully we can come up with something one way or another here.
I am supportive of the TUP. The first report for the SCRD went to 2011 when this topic first came up. So that's 9 years from now. We've been the cart is the horse has left the barn a long time ago. So for me, I'm relying on staff as professional people, and they say it's manageable. They're not telling us it's not manageable. They're saying it's manageable. So I don't see a reason not to doubt them that they're telling us the truth. It's a manageable thing in terms of staff. That balance of business and economics, this off-site operator, seems to be a way to do that. And what I heard in the public hearings is that it's the problem place that is the problem. Most responsive off-site operators, it's not a problem. So I just see it, this is the best that can be done at this point. And to go through the whole process, another public hearing, and going, is this going to be 2031 before we look at it again? So to me, it's the best of the balance. So yeah, I'm supportive of it as it is. It might be flawed, but it's the best that can be done.
Director McMahon, your turn. And I'm sorry I missed getting into the list earlier.
Okay, I am entirely opposed to the TUPs. First off, we have to do something right now before the summer again, because we haven't done anything. We've got residents who are just tearing their hair out, who are selling their homes and leaving because they are next door to party houses that just don't get shut down. And this is grossly unfair. So if nothing else, we've got to vastly increase these fines, and if we can't do more than $500, then it will be $500 a day. But we've got to somehow deal with the problem because it's just not fair to residents. The other reason that it's not fair is because these properties are being used for commercial purposes and taxed at a residential tax rate. So that's ridiculous. They're getting away with, taxation murder here. The temporary use permit would not change the tax rate that they're paying. It would merely give them permission to carry out commercial activities on residential properties, and I don't want to do that. Moreover, this whole process of setting up the TUPs, that's going to be very expensive. And even if we set the fees for a TUP very high, basically we're going to be subsidizing this process through taxation on the part of residential taxpayers, the ones who are next door to the party houses and begging us to do something about it. I'm also really concerned about the level playing field question because hotels and motels have to meet a lot of regulatory requirements. They have to be inspected. They have to follow all sorts of rules, and they have to pay higher taxes. And so these people are basically running little mini hotels and getting away with none of the regulations and none of the taxation. So I really strongly oppose this. I would consider revisiting it if we ever went to having business licenses, if only for the reason that it would allow us to have a consistent set of rules all the way across the coast, because the different jurisdictions thing is a pain in the backside. My concern is that we take action right now to raise the fines, and then to make sure that before the summer season we can have some better enforcement in place.
Director Lee, and then I'm hoping somebody might make a motion somewhere in
here. I think we covered the one of a definition of an STR to make it like a B&B. That's in there. I was wondering about a definition of an on-site operator and what we expect of an on-site operator. Do we have that definition? And do we agree on it? Because we've had short-term rentals in my area for quite a while, and residents have actually been successful in shutting down the party houses by the complaint process using neighbors and the SCRD, and they have shut them down. So it kind of works. But all the same, my wife has looked after our neighbors' short-term rental when they were away on vacation, and she's probably a better policeman than they are on the use of it. So I don't know what a definition of an on-site operator is. Could you be an on-site operator and go on vacation and still rent the place out, for instance? Is that possible, or
No.
is an on-site operator, could an on-site operator be someone that's within 200 feet of the house on a separate property? I don't know that either.
Staff can jump in if they. Page 24 actually has the definitions of both on-site and off-site operators. Under B, sort of in the bottom third of the page. On-site operator means an operator of a bed and breakfast who resides on the property where the bed and breakfast is located and for the duration of when the bed and breakfast is in operation. An off-site property means an operator of a short-term rental accommodation who does not reside on the property where the short-term rental accommodation is operated, but resides within the boundaries of the Sunshine Coast Regional District when the short-term rental accommodation is in operation. I don't know if staff had anything they wanted to add to that, but give them a break for a minute.
Seems clear. Thank you.
For sure. And that definition is the same in the other bylaw amendment? Thank you. Director Ties.
So yeah, in the report, staff has provided alternative options, and I would like to go for alternative option 1 on page 21. Remove both the TUP and STRA provisions from the proposed bylaws, which, after some clarification, does not change the intentions that we have with the bylaw 310 amendments that will clarify some of those things that are currently not clarified. Is that correct? And then I would also like to increase the maximum fine to $500. And sorry? Well, to what is our legal maximum? Yeah, whatever it is, whatever we can raise it to, let's do that. And then I would like to, and then I'd like some clarification from staff. I got an email this morning about this motion, and they suggest that we add, considering that legal case that Director Hiltz has pointed out, and that a definition for residential use focused on home life be introduced. So if you could just give a little bit of a explanation on that one.
All right, there was a motion in there, and I did see a seconder for that, so staff, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. The comment from staff about adding a definition for residential is learning from the fairly recent case law around short-term rentals and wanting to promote clarity for users of the bylaw about what residential use means. Currently, SCRD zoning bylaws, both of them, include definitions for dwellings, but they don't include a definition for residential. And so if the intent of the motion is to clarify that the use of residential properties is for ongoing occupation by somebody who lives there on a permanent basis, then looking at the learnings from the case law, something around home life would be a helpful definition in terms of clarity for users of the bylaw and potentially for enforcement. And so on the basis of the motion that's on the floor, staff would proceed to draft a definition that meets that goal. Thank you.
Director McMahon.
Ooh, blinky thing. Having seconded the motion, I'm wondering, however, whether we should split it into two parts. The alternative option 1 as one part and the fines as a separate part, because I don't want the fines to be deferred until we've gone through this whole bylaw process. I would like that to happen ASAP.
I heard over here an amendment to remove the fines from the motion to proceed with option 1. Okay, moved? Seconded? Yeah. Okay. Everybody clear on that? All those in favor? Rural directors only? Of the amendment? Okay. Opposed? Would you like that recorded, Director Hiltz? No? Okay. All right. So we have an amended motion on the floor to proceed with option 1. Do we need it read, or do we know what we're...
Have it read because there's that secondary piece that...
Sure. Yeah, can we have that read, please?
Okay. That alternative option 1, remove both the TUP and STRA provisions from the proposed bylaw be proceeded with, and that a definition for residential use focused on home life be introduced.
All right. Anybody want to speak to that? Staff?
Thank you, Chair. So the implication of that amendment would be that a new public hearing be scheduled. And so a motion to that effect would enable staff to begin that planning process as soon as possible. Thank you.
I'll make that amendment that a public hearing be scheduled pursuant to the Government Act, Local Government Act, Section 470.
Okay. Seconder?
June.
Should we determine the director as the president to chair it as well?
They'll have to come back with a date. Our corporate I want to make sure our corporate officer is okay with what we do before she starts throwing stuff at us.
Thank you, Chair. Just to ensure that you include that the bylaw be brought back for amended second reading and that a second public hearing be scheduled, and at which point that will go forward to the February 27th board meeting, where we will actually read the bylaw and then confirm the date, time, and place for a second public hearing.
Yes, that's exactly the amendment I wanted.
I'm pretty certain that's what I heard as well, yeah. Seconded? Okay. Rural directors, those in favor of the amendment? Okay. Opposed? Director Hiltz, would you like that recorded? No? Okay. So we have an amended. Can we have it read one more time?
Okay. That alternative option number 1, to remove both the TUP and STRA provisions from the proposed bylaw, be proceeded with, and that a definition for residential use focused on home life be introduced, and that an amended bylaw be brought back for amended second reading, and that a public hearing be scheduled pursuant to Local Government Act.
I saw a nod from staff. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Would you like that recorded, Director Hiltz? No? Okay. That's carried. Director Pratt.
I'd like to follow up and make a motion that the bylaw infractions be for use. How are we going to say this now? Bylaw enforcement notice be increased to the maximum available for any short-term rent or for short-term accommodation that's being used outside of the current provisions.
I guess does it have to be for the bylaws?
Does it have to be for the specific bylaw?
Maybe staff can wordsmith
Can
that before.
do staff have any?
Staff can massage that.
Okay, the intention is understood. Seconder for that? Seconded. Director Hiltz, I saw your hand up.
It was just the maximum value could be $2 trillion, right? Yeah. So I just, it's whatever, I was just cautioning the blue sky number. It just seemed a little too.
$2 trillion would be put an end to short-term rentals pretty fast. Staff?
So the two bylaws to be amended would be the bylaw enforcement notice bylaw and the municipal ticketing bylaw. And the maximum for a BEN is $500 per occurrence, and for municipal ticketing is $1,000 per occurrence.
Not $2 trillion. Director McMahon.
Yeah, darn, I figured for $9 million we could get a well.
Anybody else would like to speak to Director Lee?
The motion now says what GM Hall said then?
She's typing furiously here. Would you like it read, or you're okay?
I'm okay with that.
You're okay? The
she'll get
constant wordsmithing going on here. All right. All those in favor? Oh, you want to hear it? Okay, I'm sorry. Can you read that for us?
All right, let's try this. So that the fines be increased for the municipal ticketing information system bylaw and the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw to the maximum amount possible per day for short-term rental accommodation infraction. And I assume the bylaws have to be brought back with the amendments.
Are we happy with that? Do we need a motion that that has to come back for, it's implied? Okay. All right, shall we try that again? All those in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you very much. Anything else anybody wants to raise from this? Otherwise, Director McMahon?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but somebody asked me, would this apply to home exchanges where there is no cash is changing hands, but there's all these home swapping websites where you stay in somebody's house where they come to this country, and perhaps staff could look into it.
Director Lee.
I believe that the duration of those stays are such that it's not a short term. It becomes almost like a rental at that point. But I don't know what the limit is. Is it like longer than a month or something, and then it does? Staff might be able to tell us.
Director Pratt.
I would think that would probably fall into that residential use definition, because if it is not being used for commercial use, whereas it's being used as a swap, that's a completely different mindset than using it as a short-term rental. It's a good question, but I think it's not a commercial use. It's a home swap, so it's more of a bartering system that falls out of the commercial landscape.
You know, and to take it even further, what about things like homestays, right? Also residential use, not a commercial use necessarily. So, Director McMahon?
Well, I would appreciate it if staff just look into it, because the homestay situation has gotten a lot more complicated than it was when I first looked into it 2 years ago. So it's worth just a bit of investigation.
All right. Take a 5-minute break.
Do we need a motion for staff to look into that?
Director Pratt.
I was just going to say that I see former Director Wynn in the audience, and I know that this was a subject that was really key to him, and if he wanted to leave, if he had any questions before, as a member of the public now, unless you were planning on staying until the very, very end.
Thank you for coming. Director McMahon?
I'm just wondering if it would be helpful to get a staff report, or maybe one's been done in the past, about what our enforcement options actually are, because that's one of the continuing questions that I get. That's after MOTI, my number one source of complaints is bylaw enforcement. And it's not really understood, and it's not really understood what regional districts can and can't do. So, and like I say, you may have covered this ground in the past, so it'd be appreciated. Sure, I'll make a motion if it's needed.
Thank you. If a staff report is requested, then a motion would be appropriate. I guess an alternative approach would be a lunch and learn opportunity if a conversational format would be preferred.
Yeah, I hear 3 votes for lunch.
All right, so lunch and learn at some point in the future. Motion not required because no staff reports coming back. 5-minute break?
Yes.
All right. Calling all directors. Welcome back, everybody. Our corporate officer just ran out of the room. Excellent. We have a question for her. Well, Director Lee has a question, and we'll see where it goes from there.
I was wondering if we could take the changes to the bylaw to increase the fine to the board this afternoon. Would that speed it up so we could get this thing done by the summer? I think we're quite against the wall to get it in by prime time.
I'll take a stab at that one. In general, we've been trying very hard to avoid the quick turnover between a committee meeting to the board meeting on the same day to give staff enough time to put a good report together. In this case, this would come forward for approval on the February 27th board meeting, which should still give us plenty of time to get implementation in place.
Director Seegers?
Sorry, follow-up. So it won't actually be approved as a recommendation until February 27th, right? And then the report would need to come back with the bylaw, et cetera. I think we just want to ensure that it's in place in sufficient time. So I don't know how much time you need inside of there to actually get the bends and, all those kinds of things done.
I think based on precedent that we can have the resolution from today's meeting come to the February 27th board meeting, and then later on the same agenda have the requested bylaw amendment. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so moving on to Annex C, item 5, Roberts Creek Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 641.12 2019 and Sunshine Coast Regional District Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 310.185 2018. Consideration of third reading and adoption. Staff, you want to give a brief update?
Thank you, Chair. So I have a very brief introduction. So through the public hearing process, most participants expressed support for the proposed bylaws based on the understanding that the proposed subdivision can help to create more affordable housing opportunities and will have no adverse impact on the surrounding natural environment and the rural character. So with respect to concern raised by the adjacent property owner, the reduced size of 90 square meters for a second dwelling will provide opportunity to preserve existing trees on the property and enhance privacy between neighboring properties. So staff recommend the bylaw proceed to final reading and adoption. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Director Ties?
Yes, thank you, staff, for your patience and support to all parties involved in this application. This application was originally intended as a subdivision application, and due to a technicality, that was not possible. And so, therefore, staff and the applicant decided to follow due process and applied for a rezoning. And the two bylaws that govern that process is Bylaw 310 and our OCP. And this application is supported by our OCP. as it is currently written by Section 18. A petition was circulated that this application was going to set a precedence. That's in fact incorrect, as this is the second application under Section 18 at this point, so the precedent had already been set. And Section 18 is fairly new, and while there's some debate within our OCP committee as whether the section is prescriptive enough and whether it should be there at all, it followed due process to get into the OCP, and therefore I have a duty to abide by it as a representative of the community until the community as a whole decides in the same process that got Section 18 approved that it should change. So this comes back to our greater debate in the community, what as part of our regional growth strategy, what our limits to growth should be and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's the process we're entering in now, and that's up for future debate. And considering that neither the applicant nor the vehement opponent is here, I'm just going to keep this short. And what I will say is that it'd be a shock to me if I'd lived here for 27 years at the edge of a forest to suddenly find a house being built where the forest used to be. And of course there's some perceived business implications as well. The applicant has, however, done her due diligence, followed process, and has made considerable concessions to appease the neighbors. This application is supported by our OCP, the APC, most of the immediate neighbors, the majority of the people at the public hearing, and most of the correspondence received. And I would like to therefore move staff's recommendation on page 34.
I see somebody willing to second. This is rural planning. Any questions? Nope. All those in favor? Perfect. That carried. Moving on to Annex D. Provincial referral CRN 00100, Chickawatt Creek laydown area, Blue Earth Renewables. I don't know if staff want to speak to this at all.
Thank you, Chair. The SCRD received a provincial referral from the Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development for a license of occupation for a laydown area associated with an independent power project at Chickawatt Creek. This area is the application area is approximately 0.25 hectares in size. The purpose of the laydown area is to store vehicles, equipment, and to locate emergency accommodations. The proposed area is located immediately adjacent to the existing provincial lease for Chickawatt Powerhouse, and this is approximately 8 kilometers up the Zuni River Valley from the head of Narrows Inlet. Planning analyses show that the land is zoned Industrial 9, or I-9, for independent power projects, and Blue Earth's proposed uses are permitted in this zone. At this time, however, staff recommend referral response number 4, which is refusal of the project. This recommendation is based on outstanding building permit requirements on Blue Earth's current lease in this location.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions? Director Pratt?
I would just thank staff for the report and move the recommendations on page 85.
Seconded. All those in favor? Carried. Oh, Director Hills?
Yeah, the motion is fine. Yeah, there was a question about the Sechelt Nation involvement. Are they involved in resolving the building permit issue, or is that an arm's length from the political? So this is strictly a business aspect of them? So just a little clarification.
Thank you for the question. My understanding is that Blue Earth Renewables is in partnership with the Sechelt Nation on the independent power project.
Okay. Moving on to Annex E, Gibsons and District Aquatic Facility Janitorial Services Contract Extension. Any questions from anybody? I assume we don't need a staff report or a staff discussion from this one. Director Pratt?
I'll just move the recommendations on page 104.
All right. Seconded? Seconded. And that's voting everybody except Area A, Pender Harbor. I'm sorry, Pender Harbor. Director Hiltz?
Yeah, just a question on page 105. It says management are pleased. I'm wondering, is there a process around what pleased means? Like, is there an evaluation? Is it formal? Is it verbal? Is it written? Just, what is the process to determine how pleased of the contract outcomes?
Thank you for the question, Director. Admittedly, a subjective term used there, but this contract, similar to most of our contracts, does have a formal contract evaluation process that would involve a meeting and a written record of that meeting where the performance of the contractor is evaluated. And in this case, we were pleased. Thank you.
Perfect. Director Ties.
So I'm assuming that staff expects our future lifespan study to say that the Gibsonson District Aquatic Facility has more than 5 years left on its life expectancy then?
Yes, and just to note, this is a 2-year contract extension. Thank you.
Ready to go on this one? All those in favor? Perfect. That's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex F, item number 8, step code update. Would staff like to speak to this?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, the SCRD Building Inspection Service has been preparing for the province's implementation of the Energy Step Code as part of the BC Building Code, and through liaisons with other local governments on the Sunshine Coast and around BC, and with our local building industry, lessons have been learned about how Step Code is being received and how local governments can support a smooth transition to the updated building code. And some jurisdictions have found that consultation and, in some cases, early adoption of Step 1 in advance of the provincially mandated timeline, which was 2022, have been effective. And so staff recommend, in coordination with the Town of Gibsons and the District of Sechelt, that SCRD notify the Energy Step Code Council of our intention to consult and then proceed with that consultation. And that's a requirement of the process, that notification. And staff would then report back later in 2020 on next steps based on consultation results. And a regional approach is proposed to provide consistency for builders. And these recommendations align with the strategic priorities around communication, collaboration, and also action on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just going to commend the collaborative approach in working with the Town of Gibsons and the District of Sechelt on that. Level playing fields are always a good thing. Director McMahon?
Yes, I agree with the collaboration part. I'm just going to say that at a conference I was at recently, another jurisdiction had great success with holding builders' breakfasts, where they get the builders and contractors to come in for a free breakfast on the regional district at a restaurant that's open at some ghastly hour in the morning. But it's a really good way to get these folks, at a convenient time in their working day, and to start building some relationships and get some advice. We've got a lot of challenges going forward, so anything that we can do to get some help. For instance, we have to retrofit our housing stock, and that's going to be a really difficult thing to do. And we particularly need a strategy for dealing with modest older homes and people who don't have high incomes. And that's going to be hard, but the people on the ground have a lot of expertise and experience to share with us.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. Thank you for all this information you put in here. It was very interesting reading through it. I have to say, my husband was in construction in Alberta for many years, and so when we moved out here, we were actually quite surprised to see the lack of stuff that was being done in Alberta, given the cold weather, et cetera, that wasn't being done out here. When we moved out here, we had contractors who were complaining about having to wrap the electrical boxes. Well, we've been doing that for years. Right? It was just part of what we did. So this is actually raising the standards, which is good. couple things I noticed in the documentation that was put forward, which I think we just want to, as staff and directors want to look at. On page 145, talks about density bonusing and how you can provide an incentive for either lower or upper steps. So if they're looking at, increasing it, you could potentially say, okay, we'll give you additional bonus, density for going with those higher steps. Another one is on page 147. And I know this may come into play in our case for sure, so I'll make sure that this is brought up with our planning staff. Under the floor space ratios, it says adjust the floor space ratio calculation methodologies to ensure thicker walls with more insulation are not penalized by basing calculations on the habitable floor area inside exterior walls, because we typically look at exterior walls, right? So if you have wider walls, you're penalized. So those kinds of things need to be taken into account inside of our building codes, etc. Great document.
Director Lee?
I can't resist the soapbox, of course. I think this is. I found out more about the step code that I didn't know, which I should have known. So I thought it was a great document. I actually read through all of it, and I can't argue with that. We need to get started on the step code. I understand it's going to make it more costly to build, but that's good. The only thing is that this can't be the only thing we do, because this only talks about new housing. We can do other things, and we need other plans along with this, but in BC, probably the biggest thing we can do is go from gas to electric heating, because we have enough electricity. And that's something that we should be encouraging the levels of government to put in place for us, because that's something we could do right away. And if we had, instead of incentives for wood-burning stoves, if we had incentives for heat pumps, we would then be doing something that's great at the local level. But anyways, that's beside the point. I'm going to climb off my little soapbox now and say, yes, I'm in favor of this.
Director Hiltz?
Yeah, it was it's the end, that about the regionally coordinated public consultation. So I'm interested to know, is this contemplated in the SCRD public participation toolkit? And would the regional district be the lead, and how the other local governments, how it's coordinated? Like, does the SCRD toolkit accommodate regionally coordinated public consultation as it exists now?
Thank you for the question. The public participation toolkit that SCRD has is based on the IAP2, the framework, which is pretty widely used. I know some District of Sechelt staff rely on it. And so the language, when staff come together to discuss things like this, the language that we're using is quite well aligned. And in this particular case, there is a meeting scheduled for the lead staff from all local governments for next week, I believe. So I guess we'll, coming away from that meeting, have a defined lead, but at this point, other than an agreement to work together, no detailed process has been worked out pending direction from our board and councils. Thanks.
Director Kroll?
One of the things that when this came up before Gibson's Council that was sort of flagged, and part of the reason we were looking to move it forward with collaboration between all the areas on the coast, is the requirement of the building inspectors to get up to speed with the new codes. It's going to be probably quite a large learning curve when you get into some of the higher steps.
All right. So this is Building Inspection Services, which is A, B, D, E, F, and SIGD. Does somebody want to make a recommendation? Director Hiltz?
Move the recommendations as presented in the report.
Seconder? Seconded. Last chance for questions. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex or actually, excuse me, let's look at annexes G, H, and I. Those are all APCs. Is there anything that anybody wants to pull out or identify? We've already received them. Director Lee?
Comments to make on one of the Area A ones, but I got to find it.
While Director Lee's looking, I'll just say that I was not able to attend the Area B. However, they had a very brief meeting because in the parking lot, as they were locked out of Cooper's Green. That's been, the code was wrong. So, but it was just a funny event, that's all.
Director Lee, you found your notes?
I had my notes, I just couldn't find it it's on page 172 of the practice or of our agenda. The APC would ask that references to compliance with other requirements which are not legal requirements be deleted. And specifically, they were talking about the proponent should implement both provincial and Sechelt Nation's best management practices for building and maintaining marine moorage facilities, and in particular, the most stringent of any overlapping policy. They didn't feel that that was necessary to have it in the recommendations, that that's part of the referral process and it would happen through the provincial government. And they believe it's boilerplate that's been left in and it's not necessary. I don't know what the comments would be, but I thought I would bring that forward. I don't know if staff have any comments on that. I'd be interested.
Staff might just note that the wording used in response to referrals as it relates to things like best management practices is should, not must. And so I guess staff are under the same understanding that it sounds like the APC is, that these are not legal requirements. These are advice from the local government responsible for the area, to be taken into consideration by both the provincial staff that are handling the referral, and if they're communicated through to the applicant, then to the applicant. Thank you.
You're good?
Yeah, I can answer them now.
Perfect. Okay, if there's nothing out of that, looking at Annex J, Agricultural Advisory Committee. Anything there that anybody wants to flag? It's page 178 through 180. Director Seegers.
Sorry, I'm just going to find.
Okay, nothing in agriculture. Okay, on to policing services minutes.
3 and 5.
Items 3 and 5 both pertain to forwarding correspondence on to other parties.
I'll make that motion.
Director Ties?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to follow recommendations number 3 and 5, and
Seconded. All right. All those in favor? All right. I think that's it for the minutes. So moving on to communications. Annex. We already received them. Yeah, at the beginning. Right at the beginning. Yep. Anything in Annex L, M, or N that anybody would like to pull out? Director Seegers.
So I'll just mention, I think the meeting that's been requested in the first letter has already been taken care of. Like it's already been booked, scheduled. And I do want to talk about the agriculture one. I had a question there, but pass it over to others first.
Director Hiltz.
Question on the joint use. Is that elected or staff, or does that committee exist already, or, okay, yeah.
To speak to that, there's a couple of, there's the staff side and then there's the elected side. So this is regarding the elected side. So it is, I think it's in the works already. So staff actually meets fairly regularly between the school district and the regional district. So.
Okay. Director Seegers.
Thank you. If we look at the last correspondence, Annex N, with regards to the proposed residential options for agricultural land. I mean, I wasn't at the meeting when they were talking about it at the Agricultural Advisory Committee, but in this, in one place it says, end of the first paragraph, that ALR property owners who want to have both a principal residence and a small secondary residence would not be required to apply to the ALC for approval as long as they had their local government approval. But then further on, 189, stay on the same page, second last paragraph, it says the ALC will remain the decision maker for additional residences for farm use in the ALR. So I'm confused as to where this is going and what the legislation is actually going to say. Or are they still working on putting this together and then coming out with something?
Director Pratt, you put your hand up. Do you want to?
Yeah, was it at EA that when we were at the Electoral Area Directors Forum last week, this was one of the forums that they had. It is a bit of a moving target. So this is in response to the full stop cutoff of the secondary without going through that ALC piece. So I think it's still going to be probably massaged and tweaked a little bit more as we go along. I know, and I'm going to look to the other directors that were there, or our alternative director that's in the audience who was there for that, or even to staff if there's any more clarification. But I don't, because this is all pretty recent, I don't know if much has come out of it. It sounded from speaking with ministries, when ministry staff was speaking, it sounds like it's still a little bit of a moving target, and this is really in response to the municipalities and regional districts saying, whoa, what do you mean you did that without talking to us first? So
I saw a bunch of nodding from staff. Did they want to add anything?
Thanks for the question. I was nodding in agreement that there are a number of sort of vague statements in this release that I think, particularly with respect to residences for farm workers, whether or not it's going to be considered under the proposal just to allow farm workers in short-term rentals, or whether or not that's going to be the authority of the ALC to approve. I think it is a moving target, and I think it's well said.
Director Hiltz?
Yeah, in terms of Annex N there, so has it been referred to the Agricultural Advisory? Is the April 17th is the feedback close date, so that's the question. Is this automatic that it's going to go, or do we need to refer it from board? And I will have something on Annex M, by the way, but this one.
The item was discussed briefly at the last meeting, but this news release and a request for discussion of it will be included on the next AAC meeting agenda, and staff have already made that arrangement on the agenda. Thank you.
That was actually brought up during agenda review as well. Did you have a quick follow-up?
It was on Annex M, so we're not...
Okay. Director McMahon, you're good? Okay. Go ahead, Director Hiltz.
Annex N, that correspondence in speaking with Ian Wynn, who submitted that, he wanted to specifically draw attention to the board in terms of the breakout session from the Howe Sound Community Forum in terms of what's happening in the Howe Sound region in terms of climate change and emergencies, but whether the people and the board members who are in those committees know about that, and so he wanted to draw that attention. And there was it was called a Resource Industry Professional Meeting, which was held last Wednesday when we were at LGLA, and in order to get a nomination through, you have to act as a biosphere. So in their application nomination papers, they felt that they hadn't kind of consulted as much with resource industry professionals. So in terms of acting like a biosphere, they brought together 28 industry resource professionals and doing a roundtable to act and to connect the biosphere and the resource people. So that was something so they're trying to behave as a biosphere already by bringing these industry professionals together. So that was last Wednesday at Eric Cardinal Hall.
Great. Thank you for that update. Anything further? No. No new business? No. We don't have an in-camera section, so can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Great. Thank you very much.